Let's pray as we begin this morning, shall we? Father, as we open your word, we long to bow our hearts before you and just to ask you, Lord, to speak to us these words, Lord, that you have written. We pray that we might hear, that we might understand, and that we might do all that you would intend for us in these days as we become captured and stimulated in faith and obedience because of this great story of yours. Lead us, I pray, Lord, by the power of your Spirit. Amen. So, last week we looked at the book of Numbers, and particularly this great crisis that took place here at Kadesh. The book of Numbers is basically structured around two censuses, one at the beginning and then a second census of a second generation towards the end. And at the heart of this first generation, you see over and over again the people in rebellion against God's purpose. And in the midst of the rebellion, there is a priestly function that arises that stands before God on behalf of the people. And there is a relenting, a forgiving that takes place. But it's costly because the whole first generation will not enter into the promise that God had for them, the land and its blessings. So it comes now to a second generation. And in many ways, the lessons that were learned in this first generation are being passed on to the next generation. And you see poised at the very end here, and an expectation after this great crisis at Kadesh, that the second generation, God will continue to seek to fulfill his purpose through them. You find the accounts after this crisis, like the rebellion that took place and the bronze serpent that was put up, and if they would look to that, the plague would stop. That's a prophetic picture of the priest that will stand and that will enable God's purpose to be fulfilled through his people, and judgment will be removed. You find when they got to the border of the promised land the second time, you find the king of Balak going and trying to get a prophet, Balaam, to prophesy curse over Israel. But over and over again, it's changed. The curse is turned to blessing. So it's full of blessing that is the hope that arises in the midst of the challenge and so forth that the people are facing. God is with these people. You find in the very structure of how God leads them and how they're to camp. This is the structure of their camp. It's a picture of 3 tribes and a cube. 3 tribes on each side, and in the middle of it is the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, symbolizing the presence of God that moves with these people. When they move on journey, that tabernacle and the ark leads, and the tabernacle furnishings and so forth follow. And again, it's a picture that God goes before these people. And we'll see as he goes into the land, the presence of God symbolized in the ark is what gives them victory in this land. And they respond to the presence of the cloud that either camps or moves. And when it moves, the trumpet is blown, and this is how God is leading them. It's great symbolism. So we get now to the border for the second time on the plains of Moab, and now we move into the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua, very, very simply, seems to be structured around 7 piles of testimony, rock piles. They're rock piles. You got 7 of them. And it's interesting that the first rock pile is very similar to the last one. This rock pile is very similar to this one. And this one is very similar to this one. And at the very center, you find this rock pile. And I think this is this typical Hebrew parallel chiastic structure that the author is particularly noting in describing these accounts to help us interpret their meaning. And if you look at them, the first rock pile has to do with the cutting off of the Jordan and the cutting of a covenant. This is going to be symbolic of what's going to happen in the land. At the very end, it says that Joshua reaffirms to them that he cut off the nations before them as they went into the land. See? As the Jordan was cut off, so the people will be cut off from the land in the presence of the Israel coming in to take possession. So the idea of covenant, and it's going to be very key at the very end when Joshua gives his last words to the people. It's all about covenant reaffirmation. The second major event is this event at Jericho, and it includes the account of Achan. And God is seeking to give them victory through keeping covenant. But the situation with Achan in the midst of Jericho shows you what unfaithfulness does in the midst of the community. It results in people's failure, lack of victory, because covenant has been broken. Okay? Down here, you find the parallel account towards the end of the story. There is a perceived thinking when an altar is built that the people are gravitating back to idolatry, but no, it really was keeping covenant. And so you got this reversal from unfaithfulness to faithfulness in this. The third sequence of stories is all about when they keep the instructions that God gives them, they have victory in the land. So you find victory over kings here at Ai. And then you have the parallel account, you have now victory over 5 kings in the land because they kept the instructions. Okay? And then at the very center of the whole story of Joshua, and it's very symbolic, between 2 mountains, they're in the very center of the land. They're to erect an altar and write the 10 commands, the covenant, on those rocks. And this will be symbolic of God's purpose in bringing these people into the land. They're a community who's under covenant with God from Mount Sinai, those 10 commands. Walking in them gives people capacity to become like what they worship, become like the image that they have been created in God, and they live that out in community, in land. And this is a great picture of that at the very center of the book of Joshua. So those are the huge themes. And the big story of Joshua is saying victory in the land takes place when people keep covenant with their God. Because God has a purpose of filling the earth with his image as the waters cover the sea, his glory, his likeness, so forth. All right? Now, there's just a picture in a little bit more detail. This will be in your notes now. But what I'd like to do this morning, for sake of time, we'll just have to look at these first two, and then I will touch on the center one, and I'll touch on the concluding rock pile. Now, rock piles will last a long, long time. And they will be testimony to succeeding generations. And they're pregnant with the lesson that God was seeking to teach his people. He wants us to remember these things. So you've got rock piles of testimony for future generations. Now, here are the two stories. This first story is when they crossed the Jordan. And we want to ask ourselves, what is it that God is trying to teach the people in how he leads them and how victory occurs? And the second one is the story of Jericho. Again, how he gives them victory is pregnant with a lesson, and it will be symbolized in a rock pile for future generations. So let's begin with the commission that is given to Joshua when he begins to lead the people after Moses' death. It says that the Lord said to Joshua, Moses' aide. Now this kind of picks up, we've kind of been expecting that something very, very significant is going to happen with Joshua, because Joshua seems to be the one he was there with Moses. He was there in that tent of meeting. Joshua has seen and heard, and he has been there with Moses. Now comes the time where he's going to be commissioned. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan into the land I'm about to give to you. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. No one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. And then he just says these words, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Those are profound words. To just the presence of God is absolutely sufficient for victory, no matter what the situation. I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Imagine swallowing those words. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. But then verse 6, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful. Now this strength and this courage, you begin to understand it in the light of be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Now, these words are helping us understand that at the heart of God's bringing these people into the land is that they will be a people who walk in the way of God. And what happens in the testimony and the likeness of God in community is what gets reflected when people walk in this law. Meditate on it day and night. Reflect it. Let it be, we're to be a treasured possession that reflects this in community, in land. Okay. So this is emphasizing some of the theme that I think is at the heart of this whole story and purpose of God. Then, he says, and this is then you will be prosperous and successful, and so forth. Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. The Lord your God is giving you rest. Now this is going to be an important theme. The entrance into the land is associated with entering into this rest. And remember, this rest has its roots all the way back in Genesis 1, when God creates his house, the heavens and the earth, and he puts his image in man in that house, and then he takes rest because his work is finished. And so there is an end that is associated with rest in terms of the fulfillment of God's purpose in bringing the people into the land. It's this rest. This rest is not entered into. Even all the way in the book of Hebrews, you find still the call for people to enter into the rest. What will not enable them to enter into that rest is they will rebel against God's voice. They will not listen. They will have hard hearts, and they will not enter into the rest because they won't obey the instruction. So this is a key theme that's there as well. He's giving you rest in this land. Now, there's two tribes, the Gadites and the Reubenites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, that are going to actually stay on this side of the land, but they're called to enter in with their brothers into the warfare to secure their possession of this land, and then they can go back after they have found rest, and they will settle on this side of the Jordan. Okay. Now, we come to in chapter 2. We come to this account of Rahab. Now, this account of Rahab seems to me to have some significant symbolism in terms of what God's purpose is in leading the people into the land. Is it to destroy all the people? We easily can think of that. But here's this account. When Joshua, son of Nun, it says now, secretly sent 2 spies into the land. It's interesting, the comparison of this sending of spies into the land in comparison to the one of the previous generation. There they sent 12 into the land. Joshua was one of those who, when he went in, he stayed faithful in terms of believing when he went into the land. Now here's Joshua, but this time he sends just 2 spies, and he sends them secretly. So no Israel, the rest of the community didn't even know that these guys were sent. But they go in, and they stay in a prostitute's house. And we know the story. The king of Jericho finds out that spies have come to Rahab's house, and she sends, the king sends people to Rahab's house to find those spies. But she hid them on the roof. And she hid them for a reason. And at the heart of her reason, I think, is something very significant in the story. And it comes out in these words here in chapter 2, beginning with verse 8. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof, and she said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear. Their hearts are melting, this is the phrase, in fear because of you. We have heard. Notice what gives them the fear, and it's the testimony that accompanies Israel that has already happened. In some sense, it's almost like victory has already occurred in the land because of the testimony of the people when they crossed the Red Sea. The testimony of what God did with him when he gave him victory over the king of, those two kings, Og and, yeah, you know what I mean. Okay. Victory has already occurred because of the accompanying testimony in Israel that their God is with them and is giving them the land. So they're fearing. It says that she then says, show kindness to my family because I am showing kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from this death. So she pleads for a sign that will save her household. And so the spies say, your life for our life. And they make a covenant. You saved us, we will save you. If we keep this covenant, and the sign of the covenant is going to be this red scarf that's hanging out of her window. And she, when the nation of Israel comes into the land, is supposed to make sure that all of her mother and father and brothers, her whole household, is in the house. So here you kind of have an interesting image once again. It's not too unlike the Exodus, in which you were to slaughter a lamb, and it was to be for a household, and blood over the door of the household, and don't go outside the house, and judgment will pass over. So here once again, in similar fashion, Rahab's household is going to be delivered, and the sign of that is a scarlet cord, and it has to do with a covenant that's being made between Israel and a lady who fears God, a Gentile lady, a prostitute lady. She fears God. Now that's key. That's key. All who fear God, God is pleased to deliver from judgment. So that great image, they come back. You even got the image of they leave Jericho and they're to go hide for 3 days, and the people can't find them, and then they go to Joshua and they give word. All the people are melting in fear because of us. That's his report to Joshua. Their hearts are melting in fear. Now that emphasizes too how significant fear is in terms of debilitating a people from fulfilling a purpose. They're melting in fear. All right. Now we come to Joshua chapter 3, beginning all the way up to chapter 4, verse 24. And it has to do now with the crossing of the Jordan. Joshua gets up and says in the morning, prepare yourselves. After 3 days, we will cross the Jordan. And then it begins to tell them, instruct them, how this is to happen. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it, and then you will know the way that you are to go. So the ark and the priests who carry this ark, when they go ahead, then the people are to follow, and this is how they will know the way that they are to go. again, it's a picture of the presence of God that is going before the people. God is going to be the one who makes the way. You will know how to go if you follow it. The account seems to be very, very carefully written in this kind of structure, just like the whole book is written in this kind of structure. It begins with that instruction that I just read, and then a command is given to the priests to take up the ark. So they take up the ark. And then there's a little note in here that as God has exalted Moses, so now Joshua will know the exaltation of God behind him and with him through this, because he's following the command of God. So with Moses, so I will be with you. So then the priests go and take the ark, and they stand in the Jordan. By this you are going to know that God is among you, and that the ark, as the ark goes ahead of you, you're going to know that God is with you in how this happens. And then take for yourselves 12 men, because these 12 men are then to, after they cross the Jordan, they're to go back in, and they're to each man pick up a rock, a stone, and bring it over and build a memorial with those stones. But then the center of the story is then when the soles of the feet of the priests touched the waters were cut off way up at a place called what? Ai. Notice the phrase again, the waters are cut off. That is almost at the center phrase to the whole account. When the ark and the priests carrying it put their feet in the water and stand, the water is cut off. But it's cut off way upstream, interestingly. That shows you that God is sovereignly behind this. There's nothing magic about this. This ark is not a magic box, that intrinsically has some kind of power that when you touch this, something happens. No. God is behind this, but he's trying to instruct Israel through the symbolism of how to follow his presence. Follow his instruction. And the instructions sometimes don't make rational, logical engineering sense. This is not how you cross a river. You build a bridge, No, there's something really significant about this. So after they cross the river, then they go and pick up 12 stones. This is to be a remembrance for Israel for all future generations. And they build a rock pile that will be the testimony of how he led them across. And again, at the end of the story, the crossing of the Jordan is like a prophetic picture of how he will fulfill his purpose in the land by cutting off all these nations before Israel. As impossible as crossing the Jordan, so likewise you might think impossible to gain entrance into the land, God will do it because of his victory with him. Okay? Then when they get across the Jordan, it's interesting what happens. When all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan, all the Canaanite kings along the coast, heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before Israel until we crossed over, their hearts melted. Here's again. Their hearts melted. They no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. Those words, fear and lack of courage, defeat. The instruction to Moses is what? Be courageous. Do not fear. Do not be discouraged. Well, that's a challenge. That's a step of faith that we have to overcome. Not because of us, but because God is behind it. He is going before us. He will enable us. So they're melting in fear. So at that time, it says that then the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knights and circumcise the Israelites again. A second time. This generation has not been circumcised. So there's a cutting off, a separation, symbolic of covenant with their God that they're to enter into in terms of this second generation. God is going to bring a circumcised people into the land, a people that is wholly His, in covenant relationship with Him. Then it says, the Lord said to Joshua, today, because of this, I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt. What does that mean? I've rolled away the reproach of Egypt. So the place was called Gilgal. He's rolled away that stigma of Egypt, that idolatrous situation that they were in. It's being removed. And the people are now going to be a fresh, new expression of God as He brings them into the land. Then He instructs on the eve of the 14th day, the day when the Israelites, while they camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated Passover. Now this is the first time that they celebrate Passover from the time that they did out of Egypt. Now the second generation is entering into the symbol of what's at the heart of the covenant with these people in terms of celebrating Passover. It's a sign of the covenant with His people. And then it says, the day after they celebrated Passover, they ate unleavened bread. That was to be, unleavened bread was not to be in any household. It was not to be eaten for 7 days following Passover. Symbolic of the purity, the cleanliness, and so forth of a people. And they ate unleavened bread roasted with grain. They ate unleavened bread and roasted grain from the land, and the manna stopped at this point. So now the blessing of the land begins to be their portion here. So there was a very special provision that God gave them in the wilderness to teach them that man does not live on bread alone. And now, as they enter into the land, this manna stops, and there's provision now from the land. It's all symbolic of the blessing that is accompanying a people as they walk in obedience to God's commands. The land is going to bless them, and they're going to bless the land. They're going to bring blessing into this place. All right. So there's a great reaffirmation here of covenant that is being made once again among the people. Now comes the first city that they're facing, and it's Jericho. But as Joshua gets up and goes towards Jericho, it says, now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up, and he saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" So imagine a huge person here standing before you with a drawn sword. And the man responds, "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the Lord's army." So here's some great angelic figure who's the commander of the Lord's army with a drawn sword in his hand. And his words to Joshua then, Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." There again is that great theme. God and his presence would cause us to bow our knee and then hear those words, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy." It's full of that theme of God is longing to bring in a holy people who belong to a holy God to make place holy. Okay? And you get the idea that this battle is not ours, it's the Lord's. And it will be when we follow the instructions, the Lord will give victory in the way that he wants to give victory. This is the Lord's battle, not man's. This picture is making that very, very clear before the people ever faced Jericho and the cities in the land. Okay, then we come to the story of Jericho, a familiar story. But again, just to highlight a few of the themes that we just need to keep reflecting upon, because how God instructs the people to gain victory over Jericho is to teach them and to be a testimony to future generations. So once again, beginning with chapter 6, the instructions are, Jericho is tightly shut up, but the Lord says to Joshua, "See, I've delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have all the people give a loud shout, then the wall of the city will collapse and the people will go in, every man straight in." So Joshua calls the priests, take up the Ark of the Covenant. So again, you have the idea of the priests and the Ark of the Covenant that are to symbolize God's presence with the people as they go around the city. Out front are to be these people with trumpets. And then, and there's armed guards also. And then you got the people following the ark. And they're to go around this city once every day. So you've got this symbolized 7 priests, 7 times, and on the 7th day there's going to be a great shout and a victory. Now what does that remind you of? 7 days. Creation account, again. You've got the idea of victory associated with rest. You've got, this is a work of God. He's going to fulfill his purpose on the land. And this city is going to be a very special city in terms of the victory and what it will communicate. It says that the city and all that is in it, the Lord said, is to be devoted to the Lord. This is highlight. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house are to be spared. Keep away from the devoted things so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. So there's an idea with this city of Jericho that all of it is to be devoted to the Lord. And if any man takes something from that, he will be destroyed. Because it's devoted to destruction. All the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron that are in this city are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. Keep nothing for yourself. So they devoted the city to the Lord, and they destroyed every living thing in it. But they spared Rahab. Except there was one man who secretly took something. We'll come to that in a minute. I just wanted to make note here, again, of our situation here, because this story really informed us in early years. Here we are walking around this campus. In response to a faith that said the Lord wants to give us this place for this purpose of the unreached peoples. In those days, we all started back here behind Hudson Taylor Hall. And then we walked this way, and we had to walk all the way down Oxford, all the way to Washington, and all the way back up here, and around like this, for one round around the campus. See, we couldn't walk down this way because Summit Lighthouse had this campus here. We had to go all the way down here. But it was interesting. When we started going way down here, this gets quite public when you get down here. And here are these people, 6 days. It was actually 6 weeks. We did it on Sunday afternoons. And the first 6 times it was all in silence. The newspapers were starting to take pictures, though. Pasadena Times. What are these? Huh? Oh, Star News. What are these people doing? What is all this about? And then the last day, the seventh Sunday, we had everybody out. We had the trumpets out. Even Dr. McGavran came out, and he would walk with us the 7th time. Dr. Winter's father, I think he walked with us maybe on the 7th time. And we blew the trumpets. But I can remember how we prayed and fasted that this place would be devoted, consecrated for this use of mobilizing a generation for the unreached. So it's an important part of our history. God gave it to us. But we got to fully fulfill the purpose for which he gave it to us, I believe. And a second generation is rising up. And I pray that the lessons that God sought to teach us in the first generation will be passed on to the second. Amen? Now, just a note about Achan. Chapter 6, verse 7. It says, "But the Israelites acted unfaithfully in regard to the devoted things. And Achan saw something of great value and he took it, and he hid it. Those are great words when covenant is being broken. It usually happens because, just like Adam and Eve, they saw and then they took. And then when you break covenant by taking that which is not for you to take, you must hide because you're fearful. Usually what is breaking covenant is being hidden, because it can't be publicly exposed. Right? And it's an act of unfaithfulness. It's violating covenant. Okay? So God says, now what had happened that gave them indication that something wasn't right, after Jericho, they went and they spied out Ai, and they said, we don't even need all of us to go up there. We will get victory over Ai with just a few men. But they go up there and they're defeated. They do not have victory at Ai. And they come back and they begin to mourn. And Moses falls on his face, pleading, Lord, what will they do? What will you do for your own great name? And the Lord said to Joshua, Joshua, get up off your face. Get up off your ground. Stop praying. What are you praying to me about? There's something wrong in your camp. And unless you remove it, the covenant is violated. Unless you remove this, you will not have victory. Right? This is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They've turned their backs, run because they've been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Go consecrate the people. Find out what is not right. Okay? And so he goes, and as you know, it goes all the way down to the tribe of Judah, and there is a man by the name of Achan who has stolen. And so they take him out, and they completely destroy his household and all that he had, and then a rock pile of testimony is piled up over him. And it's a symbol of the consequences of unfaithfulness. Here you have at Jericho, you have great victory through following instruction. Here you have a great failure because of violating instruction. Devoted to the Lord. And this one is destruction because he took. Okay? Well, that's the first two great stories here. At the very center, here's the picture of the altar with the 10 commands that is to be erected in the center of the land, symbolizing covenant with a people in a place for the purpose of God to be revealed. And then we get to the last story, and you find the last words to Joshua. And I'll just leave these with you here very quickly. Joshua chapter 24. It's the final and seventh rock pile. It's a big rock. It's not a pile. It's just one big rock under a tree. And you find this testimony in chapter 23, verse 3 and 9. You find these words, you yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. The Lord fought for you. He is the one who gave you victory in this land. It was not your bow. It was not your strength. It was the Lord's presence with you. One of you routed 1,000 because the Lord your God fought for you. One of you routed 1,000 because God was with you. Okay? Just as he promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Victory accompanies covenant-keeping people. So this rock then is to be a final testimony where at the very end here, Joshua says, who will you serve? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Affirmation of covenant, and this rock is going to be a picture to future generations of whether or not you are willing to abide by that. It will be a witness against you when you violate it. It will be a witness for you when you keep it. And that's the final thing. It's affirmation that the cutting off of all those nations in the land was not Joshua or Israel's doing, it was the Lord's doing. And he did it for the sake of a people that he longs to be in covenant with and to fill this land with that image. All right? That's the story of Joshua with all that we have time for today. So next week now we get into Judges, and we will see how the whole land becomes corrupt, and how idolatry corrupts a house, that corrupts a priesthood, that corrupts a tribe, and almost destroys all of Israel, a tribe of Israel. And it corrupts marriage relationship in the process. Okay? All right.